Caitlin Clark is out injured right now, and it appears that we know, well, she's out injured with a groin injury, and it appears there's footage of how it happened.
It's becoming an all-too-familiar story now, almost like a broken record that keeps playing the same frustrating tune on an endless loop. Another game rolls around, another tip-off, another chance for the league to showcase its talent, its skill, its promise to fans. And yet, somehow, right on cue, here comes another blatant, shameless, cheap shot and another hit that has nothing to do with basketball, nothing to do with defense, nothing to do with competition. It's the kind of play that instantly the crowd, the kind that makes everyone watching at home sit up, lean forward, and say, "Wait, did that really just happen?" A hit so flagrant, so unmistakably outside the bounds of fair play, so openly reckless that you'd demand the referees to blow the whistle immediately, to stop the game in its tracks, to step in with swift authority and make it absolutely clear that this isn't going to fly. Not tonight, not on their watch, but instead, what do we get? Silence. A painful, deafening silence. The referees, once again, stand there like statues, their whistles glued to their lips, their hands motionless at their sides, their eyes either closed or deliberately averted, as if pretending not to see will somehow make the moment disappear. It's almost like they've made a quiet pact amongst themselves not to protect the players, not to protect the game, but to avoid the backlash, to dodge the responsibility that comes with making the tough call when it matters most. And this isn't some isolated moment, some rare lapse in judgment. No, this is becoming routine. This is becoming the norm. Game after game, night after night, we watch as the physicality crosses the line from competitive to criminal, as players take liberties with one another that have no place in professional sports, while the very people who are supposed to enforce the rules just stand by, indifferent, detached, as though they're watching a playground scuffle instead of an elite-level contest. It's not just frustrating, it's dangerous. It sends a message, whether the league admits it or not, that certain players can be targeted, that certain fouls will be tolerated, that certain bodies are fair game. It creates an environment where players no longer trust that the game will be called fairly, where they start to feel like they have to defend themselves because no one else will. And when that happens, when players lose faith in the officials, when they lose confidence that the rules apply equally to everyone, the integrity of the sport begins to erode slowly at first, then all at once. So here we are again, watching another cheap shot go unchecked, another game descend into a mess of missed calls and swallowed whistles, another night where accountability takes a back seat to passivity. And the worst part, at this rate, we all know it's only a matter of time before it happens again.
WNBA referees has been having issues. WNBA referees simply playing against Caitlin Clark and the Fever. This is another year and another case of WNBA referees not making the right calls when it comes to Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark, one of the brightest stars and most exciting talents the league has seen in years, took a direct, undeniable hit from a Seattle Storm player, a hit that wasn't subtle, that wasn't questionable, that wasn't buried in a scrum. Of bodies? No. This was a blatant shot delivered right in front of the referee. We're talking about a front row seat to the foul, a clear line of sight, nothing obstructing the view. The official was standing there, perfectly positioned, with every opportunity to make the right call, to do their job, to protect the player, to uphold the rules that are supposed to govern the game. But what happened instead? Nothing. No whistle, no stoppage, no review, no concern, no accountability, just a silent shrug from the people who are supposed to enforce fairness, as if they had seen absolutely nothing at all. And this wasn't just some throwaway moment. This wasn't some incidental contact that could be brushed off as part of the game. This was the kind of hit that leaves a lasting impact, not just on the play, but on the player. In fact, this very hit, this ignored foul, very likely triggered the groin injury that's now sidelining Caitlin Clark, keeping her off the court, robbing fans of the chance to watch her play, and robbing her team of their most electric weapon. It's not just a missed call, it's a missed responsibility. And the ripple effects are now threatening to shape the course of her season. But let's be honest, are we even surprised at this point? Because game after game, week after week, we've seen this pattern unfold. We've seen the whistles go silent when Caitlin Clark gets hammered, shoved, tripped, body-checked, treated, less like a basketball player and more like a punching bag. We've seen the referees turn a blind eye as if somehow this level of physical abuse is just the cost of being a star in the WNBA. And every time it happens, more and more fans are starting to ask the question out loud, is this just incompetence? Or is this something darker? Are WNBA referees simply incapable of making the right calls, or is there something fundamentally broken in the system? Is this corruption? Is this deliberate? Because let's be real, if this was happening to anyone else, to any other player in any other league, there would be national headlines, league investigations, and constant media coverage demanding answers. But here, we get silence. We get excuses. We get ignored. So if you're watching this, if you've seen enough, if you're tired of watching Caitlin Clark take hit after hit with no protection, if you believe players deserve better, if you believe the league needs to step up, then drop a comment down below and let your voice be heard. Comment, protect CC, say it loud, say it clear. Because at this point, if the referees won't protect her, maybe the fans will. Let's go.
The worst missed calls I think I've ever seen in basketball.
And then when the refs don't call the bear hug,
obviously being fouled, the refs don't call.
This isn't about just one foul. It's not about a single missed call. It's not about one moment of human error that can be written off as part of the game. No, this runs much deeper. This is about a pattern that's becoming impossible to ignore. A pattern where it's no longer just an isolated oversight, no longer just a bad night for the officials, no longer just a random lapse in judgment. It's about how these so-called missed calls are starting to pile up. Game after game, incident after incident, all pointing to the same uncomfortable truth. Something is seriously wrong. Because when you start to see this happening over and over again, when you watch blatant fouls go uncalled, when you see players like Caitlin Clark take hit after hit with no protection, no whistles, no concern from the very people who are supposed to enforce the rules, it stops feeling like an accident. It starts to feel like neglect. It starts to feel like indifference. And eventually, it starts to feel like something much worse. This isn't about one foul. It's about the repeated silence that follows. It's about how silence becomes complicity. When the league's officials repeatedly fail to act, when the WNBA leadership refuses to address the growing concern, when they brush off questions, when they offer no meaningful response, no accountability, no real protection for their players, especially their most high-profile ones, that silence begins to speak volumes. That silence stops being neutral. It stops being harmless. It transforms into active participation in the problem. Because when the people in charge look the other way, when they let the same things happen over and over again without stepping in, they are no longer bystanders. They are contributors. Their refusal to act, their refusal to speak, their refusal to enforce the very rules that are supposed to protect every player on that court, they're choosing their side. And whether they realize it or not, their silence is turning into complicity. And this isn't some small issue that can be brushed under the rug. It's snowballing. It's growing. It's becoming a full-blown credibility crisis for the WNBA, a league that is supposed to stand for fairness, for competition, for growth, for opportunity. Right now, that league is sending a very different message. A message that says some players can be targeted, some players can be roughed up, some players don't get the same protection, and worst of all, that the people in charge don't seem to care. The WNBA's blind eye is no longer just a temporary oversight. It's becoming an embedded issue, a systemic failure, a cultural problem that's starting to overshadow the very game it's supposed to elevate. And if this continues unchecked, if the league keeps pretending it doesn't see what's happening right in front of its face, then what does that say about the integrity of the sport? What does that say about the future? What does that say to the next generation of players watching right now, wondering if they'll be protected when it's their turn to step on that court? This isn't just about one foul. It's about a league. At a crossroads, it's about whether they choose to fix this now or let it spiral into something that's no longer fixable.
Caitlin Clark is the needle. Caitlin is box office.
Caitlin Clark is the star. Everything else is wrapped around her, and everything else is revolving around her.
She's Rookie of the Year in the WNBA.
Caitlin Clark is the star player of the WNBA.
The most popular woman ever
in the WNBA, Caitlin Clark.
What went down in Seattle wasn't just some random, isolated incident that popped up out of nowhere. It wasn't an accidental moment that could be brushed off as the natural physicality of the game or the inevitable heat-of-a-moment clash that happens in sports. No, what happened in Seattle was part of something much bigger, something that's been building for weeks, something that's now impossible to ignore. It was the latest, clearest, and most infuriating example in what has become a long, exhausting, and deeply troubling trend where Caitlin Clark, one of the most talented, most talked about, most electrifying players to step onto a WNBA court in years, continues to take hit after hit, shot after shot, punishment after punishment, and somehow, inexplicably, has absolutely nothing to show for it. No whistles, no calls, no protection, no justice. This isn't just a one-game story. This isn't just Seattle. This has become the norm. It's a recurring pattern that stretches back game after game, city after city, matchup after matchup, where Caitlin Clark finds herself on the receiving end of physical, aggressive, sometimes borderline dangerous plays hits that would absolutely spark instant whistles and even flagrant reviews if they were happening to almost anyone else. But when it's Caitlin, silence, play on. Nothing to see here. Seattle was just the latest chapter in this disturbing narrative. It was the most recent stop on the growing list of places where Clark has been hammered, body-checked, shoved, hacked, tripped, or blindsided dull right under the noses of the referees. It's as if her pain, her fouls, her well-being are somehow invisible to the very people who are supposed to protect her, to protect all players, to uphold the rules of the game. And the most maddening part, it keeps happening right in front of them. These aren't hidden, hard-to-see moments buried in the chaos of fast breaks or scramble plays. These are obvious, clear Rasday fouls happening in plain sight, with officials standing just feet away, yet time and time again, the whistle stays silent. And so, we have to ask, why? Why does this keep happening? Why does Caitlin Clark have to endure this nightly gauntlet of unchecked physicality? Why is she repeatedly put in positions where she's targeted, battered, and sent to the floor with no accountability from the people in charge? It's no longer just frustrating, it's systemic. It's a credibility issue. When a player of her stature, her visibility, her importance to the league's growth and fan base can't get a basic foul call even when the contact is obvious. Even when it's excessive, what message does that send? Not just to Caitlin, not just to her team, but to every player in the WNBA, to every young girl watching, to every fan tuning in, expecting a fair game. What happened in Seattle was not an outlier. It was a continuation. It was just another entry in the growing highlight reel of hits that Caitlin Clark is expected to take without complaint and without protection. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to believe that this is simply a matter of missed calls. At some point, you have to stop calling it bad officiating and start calling it what it really is: a complete failure to protect one of the league's brightest stars. How many more games? How many more uncalled fouls? How many more groin shots, shoulder checks, blindside shoves? How long before the people in charge realize they're not just swallowing whistles, they're swallowing the very credibility of the league? Seattle wasn't a random moment. It was the latest proof that the system is broken.
It is a mad situation just all around when it comes to Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark has suffered yet another hard foul, and the referees failed to make a call.
The WNBA is physical, and she just needs to get over.
Let's rewind the tape. Game after game, week after week. All season long, Caitlin Clark has been absorbing contact at a level that would make a crash test dummy wince. She's been bumped, shoved, slammed, and body-checked so often, it's starting to feel like she's been dropped into a demolition derby instead of a basketball court.